Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon King, and I'm with the Colorado Small Business Development Center Network's SBDC TechSource program. I'd like to welcome you today to the webinar, Introduction to the Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR program. We're glad you can join us, and we hope that you'll receive some great takeaways today from this presentation. So very quickly, I'd like to introduce you to our SBDC TechSource program, which was designed specifically to support science and technology ventures throughout the state of Colorado, different from many accelerators and incubators that lead to equity funding, where you give away an ownership portion of your company. SBDC TechSource focuses especially on sources of non-dilutive capital. So you're not giving any equity away, and on technology commercialization and business development. And the federal grant programs that we're going to be talking about today, SBIR and STTR, are key to this conversation on non-dilutive funding. Colorado SBDC TechSource, as I said, is a specially designed program. We tap into subject matter experts, such as Stephanie Amond, who you'll hear from momentarily, to provide you, the science and technology entrepreneurs and companies, and you can be from pre-startup through advanced second stage. It's very customized. We provide direct assistance, and that comes in the form of customized expert consulting, confidential at no cost, and relevant workshops and events in person and online throughout the year. Some of the topics are SBIR, STTR, Colorado Advanced Industry Grants, how to write the proposals, and how to comply when you get the award. As I said, technology commercialization, intellectual property protection, market research, market sizing, strategic planning, all of this goes into your technology commercialization plans, and access to capital, and many, many more topics. And we'd be able to share that with you in future webinars. So three quick things. After this webinar, if you're interested in meeting one-on-one with a specialist or attending our events, workshops, or webinars, please visit our website, https://www.coloradosbdc.org/tech, that's a mouthful, to get started. Number two, today's webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive an email following the presentation with a link, and that will allow you to go back and view the webinar as often as you like or share it with others. Third, most importantly, Colorado will be hosting the National SBA Road Tour on August 16th in Boulder. You'll be able to speak with representatives of many of the federal agencies that you're going to hear about today. We'll send you more information to follow, but please keep that on your radar, put it on your calendar. It's amazing to be able to speak in person to representatives from these agencies. I would now like to introduce you to today's webinar presenter, Stephanie Amond. She'll be sharing with us for about 45 minutes, a little bit more, and then we'll have time at the end to answer any questions you may have. Feel free to type out your questions during the webinar. She'll answer them all at the end. So Stephanie is founder of Arrowhead Solutions, LLC, a full-service solutions provider for government contractors. Stephanie founded Arrowhead Solutions in 2009 after holding contract management positions in both government and private industry. Arrowhead was formed with the goal of providing companies with extra knowledge and manpower they need to succeed in a world of government contracting. Specializing in capture management, proposal preparation, contract management, subcontract, accounting, and compliance, really covering the gamut, Arrowhead provides skill sets not commonly available to many smaller government contractors. And we know that from many of the companies that we work with. Arrowhead Solutions is headquartered in Colorado. However, Arrowhead reaches clients nationwide. So if you're on the call from elsewhere, you're covered. Stephanie is a level 2 certified acquisition professional and possesses a BSA and an MBA. As a member of the small business community, she sits on the Salida Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors is an advisor to the Boulder Small Business Development Center, which we are very grateful for. She is the former president of the board of directors of the Denver chapter of the National Contract Management Association, is a speaker, expert witness, and author nationwide. Stephanie, thank you for joining us. We're going to turn the table over to you now, and we really appreciate all of your support.
Great. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to the Boulder SBDC. I'm excited to present to you today all about SBIRs. We'll kind of go into the high level of what we're going to be discussing here in shortly, but to hone in on Sharon's earlier point regarding the focus and support that we strive to provide to small businesses regarding non-dilutive capital. The SBIR STTR program, which the Small Business Administration calls America's Seed Fund, is near and dear to my heart. I've been working with this program for about 12 years now, and I've seen so many success stories with many of my clients. Have seen success stories from the outside, and I can provide you some of the names of those companies when we drive in here. But I'm really happy that the SBDC has been focusing on non-dilutive capital funding, and the federal government is a great place to start. Some people have good experiences, bad experiences, and perhaps some misconceptions about the federal government, but I want to hopefully clarify some things and of course give you some more detailed information about this program specifically. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump in. This is a high-level introduction to this program. We'll talk about what it is and what it isn't. I'll define the acronyms for you as I go along. I try to do my best to remember that I live in a world of acronyms and not everybody else does, but we'll dive into all of those things shortly. We'll talk about the phases of the program, some cradle to grave considerations. You know, this is a life cycle of funding. It starts with proposals and ends with hopefully you guys doing some great stuff with technology. We'll talk about what to think about along the way as well, some pitfalls and missteps that I've seen and want to help you avoid. Also best practices, you know, what can you do to be excellent in this program and as a government contractor in general. There's some current issues and topics we'll talk about within the program, and then some post-award considerations just to think about in general. Now for the first acronym. So we have SBIR, stands for the Small Business Innovative Research. You saw /STTR on the intro slide. That stands for Small Business Technology Transfers. So this is a combo program that we'll just refer to as the SBIR program. But it funds early stage R&D, and I talk about technology in quotations because technology can be broad, it can be multifaceted. Innovation can happen outside of computer software and, you know, high-tech satellites and all of those things. Technology is a broad definition in terms of SBIR program. Even low-tech solutions can be considered innovative. It is the largest source of early stage financing for small businesses in the United States, and we'll kind of look at some of the dollars here later in the program. But again, as I mentioned, the SBA calls this America's Seed Fund. It's non-dilutive capital, so this is great financing for small startups as well as established small businesses who are looking to perhaps, you know, develop a new line of technology or innovate on current technology and are looking for some capital to do that. It is a three-phased program. We'll go into what those phases are. The SBA is the coordinating agency for the program itself, so it's sort of the umbrella as it directs, you know, the implementation, reviews progress, it reports to Congress. You know, any changes that Congress makes to the SBIR program, the SBA is responsible for implementing. And then each of the agencies do what they will from there, and we'll kind of talk about some agency differences, but just know that the SBA is kind of the overriding agency. The SBA also runs the SBIR.gov website. So there's sort of the information link and the guide overall if you're just starting to get into the program. There are 4 main goals to the SBIR program that Congress has put into place, and SBA touts when they're pitching the program. But obviously, it's to stimulate technological innovation. The government doesn't want to be a stalemate, and they need the highest solution or the best solution that they can have to their problems. And so they see this program as something that can help them out. They have their own research centers, but small businesses tend to have the greatest innovation, and so they look to small businesses to help with their R&D. And they also see this as an opportunity to help socially and economically disadvantaged persons and businesses jumpstart their companies. It has a lot of potential for these businesses to really gain some foothold in federal contracts. And ultimately, the goal is private sector commercialization. Everybody thinks about, the internet as the initial federally funded start to what we all use every moment of the day, it seems now, in a commercial sense. So there is a lot of benefit that the federal government sees just as society as a whole by funding innovative technology. So not only does it meet their needs initially, but they hope that this will support America's growth and prosperity in the long run. There's 11 participating agencies. The way the agencies are pulled into the program is based upon the act that authorizes this program. But essentially, those agencies that have R&D budgets that exceed $100 million are required to allocate, which is right now about 3% of their R&D budget to these programs. So of that, whatever their R&D budget is, at least 3% goes into this program. You can see here on the slide the participating agencies. And as you can imagine, the Department of Defense has the biggest budget. So they're the biggest participant and the biggest spender in this program. But there are also other agencies that people don't necessarily think a lot of, especially with technology and innovation. Perhaps the Department of Education may be a surprise, or the EPA may be a surprise to some people. Of course, their spending isn't as high, but there is still opportunity there. Kind of mentioned a couple of times about this being an act of Congress, but it was established underneath the Small Business Innovation Development Act back in 1982. So it's been around for quite a long time. In the past 5 years or so, the government's been averaging about $2 billion in awards each year. So this is a very large program. It was last reauthorized in 2008. Actually, it may have been reauthorized again in 2017. So there's numerous extensions. The government's been talking about making it permanent. Some changes, every time that comes up for reauthorization, there's of course lobbyists that are pushing agendas on potential changes to the program. Right now, this program is being discussed in Congress and some committees, and there are some potential future changes, but from what I've heard, it's really regarding ownership and venture capital participation in this program. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but just know that there's really no sign of this ever going away, and really all things point to this program becoming permanent, which is really great. I mean, it's been such a valuable program. I kind of want to talk just one moment about what SBIR is not. It's not a place where, it's not necessarily like a marketplace where you have an invention that's already been built, it's already been prototyped, perhaps it's already for sale, and you want to just sell it to the government. That is not what the SBIR program is. It's for innovations that are being built, that are in development, that need more R&D. It's not necessarily a method to have your patent paid for. The government does not supply just patent funding specifically. There's strategy on patenting and payments for patents that is not necessarily just a tool to get a patents attorney's invoice paid for you. It is not a guaranteed non-competitive contract. It is a competitive program, and we'll look at some of those numbers, but the typical, on average, you kind of hear in the industry, award ratio is about 20%, 20 to 40% win rate for phase one, depending on the agency, depending on the topic, and about 50% for phase two. So don't be discouraged by these numbers. There's things that you can do to make your win rate much higher than that. However, it just as a note, it is competitive. It's not a continuous R&D track either. There's methods and situations that you can continue your R&D and continue to get SBIR funds to, for a difficult project. But the SBIR program has put into place benchmarks to ensure that we don't end up with just a continuous R&D hamster wheel, so to speak. They hope that you get out of the SBIR program and this technology gets out of the SBIR program, and you really start commercializing. And although it is geared towards small businesses, startups, it's research, it's not without any requirements for audits and reporting. If you come from an academic setting, there are some agencies that are probably a little bit more comfortable and familiar in the way that they work from what you would be familiar in an academic setting with regarding grant and research funds. However, the majority of the agencies do like to use contracts, and there's a lot of rules and contract clauses that you may be unfamiliar with that do still come along regardless of your business size. So something to think about when you jump in. There are rules about being eligible besides just being small business, and there's some rules about regarding small business size standard that actually might be a little surprising to you. So for the program, a small business is actually defined as a company with 500 or fewer employees. And I know for me, even after all these years, I just think that's an astronomical number, but that is what it is. So you might be a 2-person company competing against a 300-person company, and unfortunately, you're all small business. It must be independently owned and operated. It has to be organized for profit. The principal place of business must be in the United States. At least 51% must be owned by U.S. citizens or lawfully admitted permanent resident aliens. And then there are rules regarding VC ownership, private equity firms, and hedge funds. And there are only 2 agencies that allow multiple VC ownership scenarios, and that's the Department of Energy and Health and Human Services, and only 2 institutes within HHS allow this. And so if you're a company that has majority multiple VC ownership, there might be some discussion regarding restructuring, and there's rules regarding size of those VCs and owner citizenship status and location of those VCs. So if you have VC questions, please just let me know. It is case-by-case basis, but from a very simple standpoint, just make sure that it's majority owned in the United States by U.S. persons or other small businesses. Other small businesses can own the small business. That makes sense. The actual work must be performed in the United States. As a note, there's worry, or I should say concern, and some rules put in place to ensure that there's just not pass-throughs where a small business is just a front for something different. So the actual proposing entity, the small business, must self-perform a minimum of 2/3 of the work. And that's just for phase 1. For phase 2, that jumps up to 1/2. And their calculations are vague in some agencies and very specific in other agencies on how those calculations are made. You just have to be very careful and read the solicitation. if you think you're going to be coming up to those limits. The principal investigator, this is essentially the key personnel who's going to be leading the research. They must be employed at the business the majority of their time. And that calculation is either vague or is very specific. But typically, I'd like to advise people that that person cannot work more than 19 hours a week at another business. And so, primary employment with the small business entity, depends on your own rules regarding what employee, minimum employee time, but hopefully they're working at least 20 hours a week for your company. And they must be an employee, they cannot be a 1099. I touched upon STTR, and I'll just touch really shortly on what this is. It's more of a cooperative partnership between a small business and a research institution. And a research institution or an RI, it can be in a university, a federally funded research and development center, or a nonprofit research institute. And so there are different rules regarding that participation. It's typically a 40-60, a 60-40 split, where the research institution actually has to perform a minimum of 40% of the work. And it's more of a cooperative partnership with a theory of pulling innovation out of these universities or research organizations, and being partnered with a small business makes that easier, perhaps. And so there are some topics that are STTR topics. And so we won't dive into STTR as much. It essentially functions exactly like SBIR. They're co-located together. They have the same due dates and such. And so I just wanted to clarify what the STTR, if you see an STTR topic in the solicitation, then you kind of know why it's different. This is the most recent award history from SBIR.gov, and if you've never been on this website, I definitely suggest taking a look at it. It has a lot of very valuable information. Oddly enough, there was only reporting on awards up through 2015, but you can see that there's some small spikes. That top line through the bar graph is the success rate for phase 1. And then the bottom one is the success rate for phase 2. The left-hand y-axis are the number of awards, and the right-hand y-axis shows you the percentage for that success rate. So it looks like on average, we're actually probably closer to like 50% for success rates, and for phase 2, it's actually a little bit, excuse me, I have those switched. The top one is the success rate for phase 2, which is 50%, and the bottom line is success rate for phase 1, which is approximately 20%. So, but you can see these numbers have gone up. It went up pretty high in 2004, but we've stayed somewhat consistent in the past 3 years, from 2013 to 2015, and then the number of awards. I'd like to share the award distribution because I'm always proud of how well Colorado does in comparison to who you can see we're kind of being measured against this top tier of awards in the country. I mean, you can imagine how many government contractors and how dense Virginia is with Washington, D.C., same with California. And here we are just right below them with 7,600 awards approximately and $2.3 billion. This is again 2015 data. So we do really well as a state, and I have to say that is because of fantastic organizations like the SBDC network, the Colorado PTAC. We've got a bunch of really great experts here in the state, and just there's a lot of focus and a lot of federal funding that comes in here. But we're a pretty high-tech, innovative state that does well with this program. As I mentioned earlier, the DoD spends the most in this program, as you can imagine. Health and Human Services I suppose, comes in second, and then DOE, NASA, and NSF are about equal, and all the rest kind of fill in that one little tiny slice that's left over. So people often tell me, well, I don't really think that my technology applies to DoD. You know, we don't do bullets and bombs. And I just want to clarify and make everyone aware that there are plenty of topics within DoD that do not have to do with bullets and bombs. There's quite a few unique medical applications that the Army looks for. There are quite a few, as you can imagine, cybersecurity sort of items, a lot of great drone application and space work even happens in DoD. So I always like to advise that everybody look at DoD just in case, you know, there might be something. And NASA has been doing some really unique stuff that you would be surprised with as well. You know, some terrestrial sort of terra firma items that they're looking for. So, you know, just because you think that your stuff flies up in space or doesn't fly in space, that doesn't mean you can't look at NASA either. So just as a thought, always look around. You never know where you may fit. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is a 3-phase program, and you move through phases. There are some exceptions, and I won't really necessarily dive into those unless you've heard about one and you want to ask. Phase 1 is typically a feasibility concept analysis. So the government has a need, you have an idea, and they'll give you about $150,000. Again, this is agency dependent, and they'll typically award this in about 6 months worth of time for you to kind of test your idea, to do a feasibility study, you know, see where you can get from point A to point B. Typically, they like to see these at technology readiness level or TRL level 2, if you're familiar with that concept. Even 1, I mean, if you're just starting out, depends on the topic and how new and innovative it is, just in general. As you move along through the program, depending on the agency, you may have an automatic requirement to submit a phase 2 proposal, or you may be asked to invite on a phase 2 proposal. Again, it depends on the agency, but the goal of phase 2 is to do a prototype demonstration. So pick up where you left off at the end of phase 1, and for the next 24 months approximately is to get from that ending TRL level. So perhaps you moved over the first 6 months in phase 1 from 2 to 3. So perhaps in phase 2, you're going to move from 3 to 5, and you're going to try to get to what we call a prototype. So even if it's software, you know, we're just trying to get to a demonstration that you actually have a solution that's going to meet the need. The minimum amount of a phase 2 is usually around $750,000. They can go up much higher than that, and so you have quite a bit of money to work with for the next 2 years. The final phase is an official phase for some agencies and an unofficial phase for others, but it's essentially commercialization, and it's non-SBIR funding. Therefore, it's taking the end of your phase 2 and giving you more funds, whether within the agency that you had been working for and they're just not using their SBIR budget anymore, or outside that agency and you're getting work and money from perhaps a large prime contractor or a different agency, but somebody's funding the continued development to make this a marketable product or service. And that is the ultimate goal, is to reach phase 3. The nice thing about phase 3 is that it's sole source, or it can be sole source. And so, which is great if you're working with, we'll just say it's the Air Force, and you won a phase 1, they liked what you did, you won the phase 2, you got to a great place near the end of phase 2, and this customer just loves what you're doing so much, they went out and found non-SBIR funding to give you a phase 3. They do not have to compete that last phase 3. They can just give you the funding. It's not without a proposal and requirements and all that kind of thing, but you do not have to compete for that like you did in phase 1 and phase 2. So it's really nice. Before you endeavor on any phase 1, the goal should ultimately be phase 3. You know, where do you want to be in approximately 3 years from now with this technology, and can this program help you get there? There are a few first steps to go through before you can even jump into this pool. And of course, it's not without many websites and many passwords and many registrations. But at a minimum, you'll need a tax ID number. You'll need your DUNS number from Dun & Bradstreet. You'll need to register in sam.gov once that happens, once you get a DUNS. You may have to register in grants.gov or the actual agency's SBIR site. There is an SBA company registry as well on SBIR.gov. And then each of these other agencies have other ancillary websites. And so all of this website requirement and registration requirement are all in the solicitations. So this is out there and it's written down for you to go follow steps, but it can be slightly confusing, and it's something you definitely do not want to wait until the last minute to have done. Some of these things could take many, many weeks. So if you feel like you see a solicitation proposal due date on the horizon, you haven't done any of these things, be very aware of how long it could take to get through some of these processes. I do suggest using the PTAC because they are a free service that kind of helps you get through some of these basic registrations. And the SBDC advisors, consultants can support you through some of these things as well if you've never done it before. Here's a little handy chart from SBIR.gov that can just help you understand the differences between the main agencies that provide the most funding, I guess, for SBIR and the different sites and the different requirements of registration for each of them. Just kind of a handy visual for you. I mentioned on a couple slides ago about the SBC company registry. This is done on SBIR.gov. You're required to complete this company registry, provided that you have your DUNS number and all those other things done first. But you must do this prior to submitting any application to any agency. So this is one that must be done always. It's used to report or update, and you should be updating this annually, the ownership information to the SBA. And what you get out of this, I suppose, is the output is this thing called an SBC control ID, and it ends up being an actual PDF file that you can download. Some agencies require you just to input your SBC control ID number into the application, and some agencies require you to actually upload a copy of the PDF of your registration. The information is not shared publicly, so there's no worry about that, but just ensure that the data is correct and as it's used to tie to your application and future award. Okay, so that's all of the information about what is this thing, how does it work, and so of course the next thing is, okay, well, where can I find the solicitation? You know, where are these things? There are great resources, as I mentioned earlier, on SBIR.gov, and you can look at the open solicitations right now. You can look at some future ones, and it's always helpful to look at the closed ones as well, because some agencies only release a solicitation once a year. And so unless you look at the closed tab here on SBIR.gov, you may not know that NASA has their solicitation in the January-February timeframe. So DoD releases 3 times a year, and you'll see here that it is currently open with proposals due on July 1st. NSF is also open. Their open phase is, we'll talk about that later. It's a little bit nebulous. It's sort of always open in a way. And HHS is always sort of always open as well. So it's kind of interesting as you go back and forth from the site, but just keep a close eye on it. And you can always go to each of the agencies' actual websites to get more information about these. So the way that these solicitations work is that the agencies post the solicitation describing their program, and then they have a list of technical areas of interests or topics. And for example, the DoD has an umbrella solicitation, and then each agency participating in that round will have a supplemental solicitation that includes all of the topics that they have. Each agency has its own proposal submission guidelines, and so if you're proposing to NASA, don't assume you can use that same proposal to go to the Air Force, because the requirements for what's included in some of the formatting and technical volume sections are different. So, and it's even different within the DoD, so you can't rely on an Army solicitation to guide your Air Force proposal. I already mentioned some of the solicitation timelines. In NASA is once a year, DoD is 3 times a year. They will post those solicitations on SBIR.gov, or there'll be a link from SBIR.gov. If they use grants.gov, for example, the DOE, HHS, you'll find the solicitation there. It should also be posted on FBO.gov, which is Federal Business Opportunities, if you're on that site already. And as an aside, the topics can be very specific, as in DoD has very specific topics or a very technical need, and NSF is very broad and open. So pay attention to where you are. When we talk about agency applicability, it really talks about what are inside those topics. Where does your technology fit? It could fit across multiple agencies, which is fine and actually great. But if you don't fit in a very specific DoD topic with, they have very small parameters to fit in, but they have many, many topics, so hopefully you fit into something. But if you don't, maybe DoD is not the fit, and maybe you should look over towards NSF, or NASA even. They're a little bit more broad and a little bit more flexible in terms of the solutions that they're looking for. So when you're planning on going after this, and it's your first time you're looking at phase 1 topics, where do you fit? Where is your biggest bang for your buck? Which agency? Checking out the release timelines are key. Here we are, the 1st of June is tomorrow. If you're planning on the DoD proposal and this is the first time you're thinking about it, you want to find something today and start today. I would not wait any longer to try to get a proposal in by July 1st, especially if you've never been through this process before. So ensure you give yourself enough time. The topic selection kind of relates to which agency is best for you. But say you think Air Force is a great fit, there's a few topics you could go after. Again, reviewing what the topic says, maybe taking a look at prior awards in that technology area, doing some market research can help you decide which topic or topics to go after. Teaming is also a good thing to start thinking about. If you can't self-perform any of the topics, then you need a little bit of help from a partner, a consultant, a vendor, whatever you want to call them, but you might need some little support. Even if it's a university, you can definitely subcontract to the university under a phase 1 and a phase 2. Who do you need to start talking to? What can they bring to the table? How much money do you think they'll need? Can you fit underneath of those 1/3 and 1/2 thresholds, depending on where you're at? And how do they fit into the bigger picture of commercialization? That's something to always think about. Another planning element is the relationships with the technical points of contact at the agency. Some agencies are much more open than others to learn more about what the agency is looking at technically, what their goals are. NSF puts their portfolio on their website. They have people's names and email addresses, and generally those people are great about talking to you. And understanding where they're coming from is the best bet, because you don't want to necessarily come out of left field and have a reviewer say, oh, that's nothing we're interested in at all. Yeah, sort of meets the topic, but I don't really care about that. You don't want to go through a whole bid and proposal effort to get to that conclusion on the government side. So building a relationship, always having these people identified beforehand before you write a proposal to them is great. We'll talk a little bit more about commercialization potential, even further than what I've already mentioned. But again, don't go into this without identifying whether or not you think this is actually going to be something worthwhile. In general, these submission packages have, across all agencies, similar elements. They all have a cover page. They all have a technical proposal of some sort. You will have a cost proposal or budget form you need to fill out. And then there'll be a company commercialization report to talk about what you've been able to do. If you've already been in the SBIR program, how successful you've been, but also gives you an opportunity to talk about whether or not so you're coming from a commercial world already and you kind of already have a market. That's a place to talk about it. I like to always talk about a couple of agencies that are a little bit more complicated than others. You might want to give yourself a little bit more time, and they have a lot more parts than what you see here in these 4 bullets. But anything that goes through grants.gov will have more bits and pieces, and anything that goes through NASA's electronic handbook are definitely a little bit more complicated, take a little bit more time. People ask me about multiple proposals often, and so I just wanted to point that you may apply to different agencies for similar work. So even, you might have something that really fits with the Army proposal round and the Air Force proposal round at the same time. That's fine. You do have to identify in your proposal, and there's ways to do that very easily, whether or not you are submitting similar proposals to other agencies. But you may not accept an award from different agencies for a duplicative project. So if you put the same exact proposal essentially for Army and Air Force, and you win both of them, you cannot be funded for both of them. So ensure that there's some slightly different technical work, some slightly different outcome or objective between the two, and then you'll be fine, but just be aware of that. For a typical phase 1, I like to point out that this is a longer lead timeline. It's quick in some respects if you've been in government world otherwise, but it could take 5 to 8 months from when the solicitation is released to when you can actually begin work. And so if you're looking for non-dilutive capital next month, this is not the program for you. Even if proposals for DoD are due July 1st, you may not be working until the fall. So it's really good to understand in your pipeline, where does this fit? Where does this funding fit if you get it? And how does it fit in the long-term cycle if you were to get phase 2 funding, and then, on from there. So when I talk about this kind of being like a 3-year process, that's essentially where I come from. It could be approximately, give or take, 3 years to get to the end of your phase 2. Some need to knows about phase 1. They are typically firm fixed price, but you might have to do some more price backup than you would think you should for a firm fixed price. Definitely to make sure that the phase 1 objectives from the topic are met. The government kind of gives you clues on what they're looking for, and you have to be very clear that you understand those. Ensure in your phase 1 that you have a plan for phase 2. You know what you would do with phase 2 money should you get it before you even start to write. That's going to be obvious to the reviewer. They're not going to give you phase 1 money if you don't know what you would do for phase 2. Companies with these relationships with the technical POCs are definitely more successful. I have to say that from personal experience. So really doing some glad handing can't hurt. You do have to watch out for ITAR and data rights issues. And so, these are things you have to understand in phase 1 because they will follow and benefit or follow and haunt you throughout the entire program if you don't think about it first. It's definitely valuable to ask questions during the pre-solicitation phase. So this is kind of the first 30 days of the solicitation's opening that you can talk. And so it's great to ask as many questions as you can to get an idea of the technical goals in further detail. For phase 2, some of the things you need to know about are typically cost type, so there will be more pricing backup. It could trigger a DoD audit of your accounting system if it's the first time you've been through it. Your commercialization needs to be very quantifiable. In a phase 2, they want to ensure that you really know the market, you really know your competitors, you know where this is going to go and how much money you need to get there. If they're allowed, letters of support from outside companies or future customers are super helpful. And ensuring you always go back to the phase one solicitation to kind of refresh on requirements and objectives. Some potential pitfalls that I see are format, just not paying attention to the requirements, not having a strong principal investigator. They do not have to have a PhD, but they do have to be strong and respected in their field and understand the field. Often I see proposals that just don't have innovation. They're just not really communicating how this is an innovative approach to a problem. And even if it is innovative, you have to be creative in writing it. Weak commercialization gets dinged all the time on people's proposals. Just throwing numbers out there with unsupported and unsubstantiated and undocumented prices will nail you every single time. And if you miss any Q&A that are very important or modifications to solicitation, that could also harm your proposal. And then just the easy stuff, people think that they have plenty of time in the world, but I would say most of the SBIR proposals I submit or help people submit are done within the last hour of the proposal timeline, and that is not okay, but even make sure you give yourself enough time. There are some performance benchmarks to be aware of. As I mentioned, this is not a continuous R&D track. So the SBA put these benchmarks in place to avoid these SBIR shops that just survive on ones and twos all the time. So you must meet some transition goals from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. And there's a ratio that's calculated by the agencies based upon number of wins of ones and dollars of commercialization revenue. So just be aware. I mean, this ratio kicks into place, after many awards and or years in the program, but just be aware it's there. The SBA does identify each June, so yay tomorrow, which companies didn't meet benchmarks and who's not going to be eligible to receive a phase one. The public won't know this, but you will be notified by the government that you're no longer eligible to do SBIR because you missed the mark. Some best practices that I like to share with people, kind of head towards a positive note here. Really make sure you have a solid and compliant accounting system, whether or not you're going to have your accounting system audited or you're doing DoD. That's all obviously a requirement. However, if you don't have a great accounting system as well as a purchasing and timekeeping system, you will not have the data to show you that you're actually making money on these projects. Having a purchasing system is really important too, because there's rules about spending taxpayer money. So you're using taxpayer money. So if you don't do that correctly, you're going to be in trouble in the future. You do need to understand the customer and their current culture. Don't come out of left field, as I mentioned. This is sort of a hot button topic. Some people say they don't want to participate in the program because they know topics are geared for others, and that's true. But you can also, that's not always, and it's not the majority. And you can also be one of those companies that gets a topic written for you. And this goes back to the relationship with the TPOCs, and it goes back to ensuring that you're essentially selling what you can do before these solicitations even come out. That can be you as well. Definitely manage your intellectual property rights, your data rights. There's a lot to be gained if you can do that correctly. And then teaming with stellar companies, ensuring that you pick good partners and you don't end up with a dud that causes you to look bad to the government. Some current trends that I'm seeing, the SAT is a simplified acquisition threshold, and typically we're not supposed to have to provide a ton of rate justifications and detail for firm fixed price contracts under $250,000, which is a phase one, but the government is still doing it. And so you just have to be prepared to provide backup information on your price and ensure, again, that it's justifiable. There is more rules regarding ITAR compliance. The DD 2345 is related. It's a defense form that's related. You have to get approval to export. There are additional forms and new training for the Air Force. There's a fraud, waste, and abuse training that you have to sit through for the Air Force. It's online. It's not a big deal. And they have some more forms. You may have heard about or seen already these Air Force special topics and pitch days. These are wide open topics. This is a pilot program. The SBDC, Boulder SBDC, and Sharon knows quite a bit about this. You could talk to her about this a little bit more. But they are shorter in duration. They're less money, but they're kind of a push to commercialization, and they seem to be doing really well and getting some non-traditional, maybe companies who wouldn't think about SBIR into the program, and they're doing well and getting some good money. Recently, there's been a Navy out of cycle, sort of similar to the Air Force special topics that they've tried to do. This just closed and it's called Navy X. You might want to keep an eye out for that in the future. There is technical and business assistance funding that there's been some changes there that can offer, depending on the agency, up to $50,000 in assistance to do marketing, commercialization, support some patent costs, some manufacturing and regulatory compliance, and just all of that. So that's been really great. And then, as I mentioned, I briefly touched upon NSF. NSF has made a change where you must pitch your idea to them first, and then they will invite you to do a phase one if they like your pitch, and you'll find that information on their website. So those are some interesting things that are kind of changing in this program. If you've been in it in the past and are coming back to it, perhaps might be new. I won't spend too much time on what TABA actually, technical and business assistance actually is. Some agencies use it, some agencies do not, but it does authorize up to $6,500 for phase one to get some business assistance, you know, even from people like myself, some other advisors at the SBDC, and it can go up to $50,000 for phase two, as I mentioned, and each agency decides what they're going to do with this. And DOE has recently decided that they are going to provide the full $50,000 on a phase two, and they're going to do that in addition to your phase two amount. So it doesn't take away from your R&D budget, which is really cool. There's a lot of things that you can do with this, and you can be pretty flexible with it. You can use a DOE provider, you can use somebody outside as a private consultant. And we can talk to you more about that if you're interested in what this is. Some concerns for small businesses, as I mentioned, just proposal prep and planning. You know, you didn't give yourself enough time to build a proposal and you did too much science to get ready. Unsupported pricing is a concern. You might need some commercialization assistance. You know, it might not be your forte. You might not have anyone on staff, and you can reach out to people. You know, some advisors at the SBDC can support you with this. There's some post-award contract management. Again, this is contracts with rules and clauses that you'll have to be aware of, and you may not have somebody on staff to support you. Same with intellectual property protection and future audits. There's some things that you'll have to be watching for ahead of you. I already talked about some audits. You could get a pre-award system accounting audit. These are typically triggered by a DoD cost plus fixed fee contract. There will be government property management concerns. You might have the Defense Contract Management Agency come in and actually audit your property management. And this is not just government property given to you. This is anything you purchase with the government money. And I can talk to you more about that. It's a whole separate training. You do need to worry about timekeeping, ensuring you're watching and tracking people's time. DOE does require an external accounting audit when you spend $750,000 of their money in a year. And so that's something to plan for and budget. And then again, justifying your price. I guess I can't say that enough. You do need to assert your rights to intellectual property during the proposal and perhaps during performance. You have to mark everything you deliver, asserting those rights, and then track your internal IP development. And again, I can talk to you separately about intellectual property protection all day, but you know, if you're using seed money to innovate, you want to be able to protect it. You know, the government will get ultimate right to use your technology. You get to retain ownership. The time limits for the protection of SBIR data rights, which limits the government's ability for 5 years for DOD or 4 years for civilian agency, or 20 years on a phase 2 for DOE, the government can't touch it for, can't really do much with it. But once those years expire, then they have unlimited rights. So just be aware of that. And then we have compliant purchasing and subcontracting. There's, requirements by the Federal Acquisition Regulation. You'll be tested by the DoD for sure. Just know that you're entrusted with taxpayer money. So of course, there's going to be rules that come along with it. In summary, this is a valuable asset. It's non-dilutive capital. It can be a pathway for growth of your business. It does come with rules, again, taxpayer money, and there are considerations. Some of the things I mentioned may have made you decide that's not a big deal, we can handle it, or may make you think this is not worth it. So, it is a strategic decision on whether or not you want to bring taxpayer money into your company. A couple of useful websites for your reference here, and you'll get a copy of these slides. So you'll have access to use these in a link. So that is it for me. I don't know if we had any questions, Sharon or Jamie. I don't really see anything on my chat box. Do you have any questions that came in I can answer?
We have two quick questions. Number one, do you already have to have your topic, or I'm assuming it means your technology, in process before starting with a phase 1?
No, so you don't necessarily have to have a technology. Most people have some basis before they come in, prior research, something they're working on privately that, they might put into the commercial market. But it could just be, a kernel, a little nugget that just needs to grow, a little seed that needs to grow. And it doesn't have to be an actually full-blown technology. And that's why you need the phase 1 money, is to, kind of further develop an idea.
Perfect. The second one is it a good idea or not to reach out to representatives at the different agencies before you take time to review a topic and do the actual grant submission or contract submission?
Yeah, definitely. Unless you find yourself in a situation where, say DoD phase 1 is due in a month and there is like the perfect topic that you can nail, then I always suggest going for it, and sometimes putting a proposal in is the best way to kind of get your foot in the door and get a conversation started and get a point of contact, even if you don't get selected. So it might be worth your time and effort, even if you haven't talked to anybody, because you may not get any other way in, and you may not get any other communication or ability to show yourself. And so, but outside of that, as much as you can communicate and work with and find these people who are writing these topics or who are managing these programs at the agencies, for sure, go for it. And that just gives you a better chance of understanding whether or not you should go after a topic if it's not a slam dunk on its face.
Okay, thank you. That's terrific. So I want to thank Stephanie again for presenting the webinar today. It's tremendously useful information, and we know that you'll probably have questions, or you may want some clarifications, further information after seeing the webinar. So SBDC, as we said, provides one-on-one consulting. It is confidential at no cost. Stephanie is one of our consultants, and it's available through the life of your business. So if you want to take the next step or to get more information or schedule an initial appointment, just go to coloradosbdc.org/tech, T-E-C-H, and we'll get back in touch with you as soon as possible to help you get going. 2 quick dates to remember. The next webinar, How R&D Tax Credits Could Benefit Your Business, will be on Tuesday, June 18th from 10 to 11. Those are federal R&D tax credits. It's actual, could end up being cash back or credits, and it's actually real funding, non-dilutive capital for technology and R&D companies. The second date is, again, the National SBIR Road Tour, Friday, August 16th. It's a full-day event. We'll send you some information about it, and it's the first time it's been in Colorado in a very long time. So thank you again for all joining us. We'll see you next time.